Did you know that the T-54 and T-55 tanks are the most produced tanks in history? Discover how these Cold War giants, developed right after World War II, revolutionized modern warfare and are still used around the globe today. The T-54 and T-55 tanks were Soviet medium tanks introduced shortly after World War II, initially built as successors to the famed T-34 and T-44 models. The first prototype of the T-54 was completed in late 1945, and by the 1950s, these tanks had become central to the Soviet Union's armored forces, as well as the military forces of many other nations around the globe. These tanks played crucial roles in numerous conflicts throughout the second half of the 20th century, from the Cold War to more recent conflicts, even into the 2020s. Despite their age, the T-54 and T-55 tanks are still in use today, with a significant number upgraded and modernized to suit contemporary combat environments. The T-54-55 series remains the most produced tank in history, with estimated production figures ranging from 96,500 to 100,000. These tanks were gradually replaced by newer Soviet designs, like the T-62, T-64, T-72, T-80, and T-90, but still continue to see service in several countries around the world. A Chinese version of the T-54, known as the Type 59, was also widely produced. During the Cold War, these tanks never directly engaged NATO forces in Europe. However, their presence in Eastern Bloc armies prompted Western nations to upgrade their military capabilities. The UK's response was to develop the Royal Ordnance L7 tank gun, while the United States produced the M60 tank to counter the growing Soviet armored threat. Development and evolution. The T-54 and T-55 were direct descendants of the Soviet T-34 and T-44. During World War II, the T-34 proved to be one of the most effective and influential tanks of the war, but engineers faced challenges upgrading it with modern technology during the conflict. By 1943, Soviet engineers were already working on its successor, which led to the development of the T-44. With an innovative torsion bar suspension, a compact engine arrangement, and enhanced armor, the T-44 offered significant improvements. However, the Soviet Union chose to focus production on the T-34 due to its existing supply chain and numbers. After World War II, the development shifted to improve firepower and armor. Prototypes of the T-54 showed that it needed just a few adjustments, such as a larger turret and slight increases in hull size, to become a formidable weapon. Production began in earnest in 1947, with further modifications to address reliability issues and other design aspects. In its various iterations, the T-54 underwent numerous changes, such as improved armor, modernized transmission, and changes to its weaponry. The T-54-2, introduced in 1949, received a new turret inspired by the IS-3 heavy tank, and subsequent versions saw even more refinements. By 1958, the T-55 was in production, a variant that offered increased armor protection, greater ammunition storage, and importantly, the world's first NBC, nuclear, biological, and chemical protection system, which was crucial during the Cold War era. The T-54-55 was superior in terms of its firepower and armor compared to World War II designs. It had a powerful 100mm gun that could fire armor-piercing rounds, giving it an advantage over many contemporaries. The low silhouette made it harder to detect on the battlefield, but also presented some limitations, such as reduced gun depression. This limited its ability to fire from hull-down positions, a disadvantage in hilly terrains. Still, the T-54-55 became one of the mainstays of Soviet and Warsaw Pact armored forces. Combat history. The T-54 and T-55 tanks saw combat in several key conflicts during the 20th and early 21st centuries. During the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, Soviet forces used T-54s to suppress uprisings, where Hungarian revolutionaries managed to capture and disable a few tanks using Molotov cocktails and anti-tank weapons. This experience highlighted both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the tank in urban warfare. The tanks played pivotal roles in the Middle East as well. In the 1967 Six-Day War, T-54s and T-55s faced off against Israeli tanks, including American-supplied M48 Pattons and British Centurions. Despite their numbers and the quality of the tanks, poor tactical employment led to heavy losses for the Egyptian and Syrian forces. Again, during the Yom Kippur War in 1973, T-54s faced significant challenges against more modern Israeli tanks. Nevertheless, the widespread availability of these tanks meant they were used extensively by both regular and reserve forces. In the Vietnam War, North Vietnamese forces relied heavily on T-54s and their Chinese counterparts, the Type 59, against American-supported South Vietnamese troops. Notably, a T-54 was among the first tanks to breach the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon during the fall of the city in 1975, marking the end of the conflict. The image of the T-54 crashing through the gates became an iconic symbol of the war's conclusion, adaptations, and modernizations. One of the reasons for the enduring use of the T-54-55 tanks has been their adaptability. Numerous countries have upgraded these tanks to keep them relevant on modern battlefields. Some upgrades included enhanced armor, improved engines, and the addition of laser rangefinders and more advanced fire control systems. During the Angolan Civil War, for example, Soviet advisors helped modernize the Angolan T-54s to better face off against the South African Defense Forces armor. In addition, in the late 1980s, a joint US-China initiative led to the development of the Jaguar, a modernization project based on the Chinese Type 59, a T-54 clone. These modified tanks received new engines, Western-made 105mm guns, and updated targeting systems, transforming them into a competitive main battle tank at a fraction of the cost of newer models. Cold War era and beyond. Throughout the Cold War, the T-54-55 tanks were central to Soviet and Allied armored divisions. Though they never directly faced NATO tanks in Europe, their numbers alone posed a significant strategic threat. Their deployment in Soviet client states meant that conflicts in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East frequently featured T-54s and T-55s on one or both sides. This was evident in the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, where both nations deployed these tanks, often facing off against each other. Even as more modern tanks like the T-72 and T-80 entered service, the T-54-55 tanks remained in use for secondary roles or were sold off to Allied nations. These tanks became popular with nations looking for affordable yet powerful armored vehicles. Their ubiquity also meant that they appeared in many post-Cold War conflicts, from the Balkans during the Yugoslav wars to the civil conflicts in Africa. Modern use and recent conflicts. The T-54-55 tanks have continued to serve in the 21st century, especially among countries with limited military budgets. During the 2020s, Russia, facing significant losses of more modern equipment in the invasion of Ukraine, deployed T-54 and T-55 tanks from storage. These older tanks filled roles that required fire support rather than frontline engagements due to their vulnerabilities against modern anti-tank weapons. Similarly, Ukraine, with the help of Western allies, upgraded some of its older T-55 models. The upgraded M55S tanks featured improved fire control, a more powerful NATO standard 105mm gun, and additional armor, which made them more survivable in modern combat scenarios. These upgrades ensured that the T-55 could still contribute meaningfully to Ukraine's defense during the ongoing conflict. Conclusion. The T-54 and T-55 tanks are a testament to the durability and adaptability of Soviet tank design. First developed in the immediate aftermath of World War II, these tanks have served in more conflicts than perhaps any other armored vehicle in history. Their extensive use in conflicts spanning from the Middle East to Africa and from Europe to Southeast Asia showcases their versatility and robustness. Despite being replaced in frontline Soviet and Russian service by more advanced tanks, the T-54-55 has found a second life with upgrades and in the hands of nations that value its affordability and ease of use. It remains an important symbol of Soviet engineering, a machine designed to be simple, rugged, and effective. As recent events have shown, even in a modern battlefield dominated by advanced technologies, there is still a place for the old warhorse, the T-54-55.